I have ruled over the silver unconquered for 200 years, and in all that time I had never once watched a thing be made slowly. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. In my empire, nothing was mended. Nothing was patched, darned, glued, splinted, or coaxed back into use. When a thing broke, the loom hall unmade it and grew a flawless new one in the time it takes to draw a breath, and the broken thing was fed back into the vats to become the next flawless new thing. We were proud of this. We called it grace. A cracked cup, a frayed banner, a snapped blade, all of it gone and replaced before you could feel the loss. My people had not held a needle in 9 generations. We did not know we had lost anything, because losing was the one thing our machines had abolished. So you must forgive me that I did not, at first, recognize what the old human woman was offering me. I had no word for it. My tongue had let the word go. Let me begin where the trouble began, which was in the deepest cabinet of my private wardrobe tower, on the 9th morning before the renewal. The renewal comes once a century. On that day the ruler of the conquered stands before the assembled houses in the hall of 1,000 looms and renews the covenant that binds our worlds, a covenant older than my throne, older than the machines. And on that day the ruler wears the first mantle, not a mantle like the first mantle itself, the very cloth. It is the one exception in all our law to the rule of replacement. It may not be unmade. It may not be copied for the ceremony. It must be the true garment, carried forward across the centuries, because the covenant it stands for cannot be fabricated either. It can only be kept. I had woven that mantle myself. I was not always Empress. Before the crown, I was a girl in the loom provinces of Havrain, and in those days my people still made things with their hands, because the great machines had not yet reached the far shore of the conquered. My mother taught me the loom before she taught me my letters. The first mantle, the covenant cloth, was the last thing I ever wove before the throne came for me. Deep indigo, shot through with a single line of silver thread that I had spun myself and dyed badly, so that the silver ran uneven along the hem, brighter in some places than others. A flaw. My mother would have made me pull it out and start again. I kept it. I was young and stubborn, and I liked that the light caught it unevenly. And by the time I understood that an empress is not permitted flaws, the mantle was finished and blessed and beyond changing. And so the flaw came with me to the throne and stayed there for 200 years. That mantle had crossed my shoulders at every renewal of my reign. And on the 9th morning before this one, when my wardrobe steward drew it from its cabinet and laid it across the light table for inspection, I saw that it was dying. 2 centuries of ceremony had worn it thin. The indigo had gone soft and gray at the shoulders where the weight of it rode. The uneven silver hem, my beautiful stubborn flaw, had frayed in a dozen places, whole runs of thread lifted and broken, and along the lower edge a tear had opened the width of my hand, the weave unraveling into loose fringe. It looked less like a garment than like something found in the ground. My steward, Threnody, went very still beside the table. He is a careful soul, Threnody, silver-scaled at the temples, older than most of my court, and he had dressed me for 90 years. "We have 8 days," he said quietly. "To do what?" I asked, because you must understand, in the conquered, a ruined thing was not a problem. A ruined thing was already, in every practical sense, gone. You did not mend it. You unmade it and grew it new. But the first mantle could not be unmade. That was the law. And so, for the first time in 9 generations, my court was faced with the one situation our machines were built to make impossible. A broken thing that could not be replaced, and that no living hand among us knew how to fix. By midday, the wardrobe tower was full of artificers. I summoned the finest the conquered had. Voss came first, loomwright paramount, master of the great fabrication hall, the being who could grow a cathedral out of raw light between one bell and the next. Behind him came his under-artificers, a dozen of them, pale and precise in their gray working robes, each carrying instruments so fine they could count the atoms in a thread. They gathered around the light table and looked down at my dying mantle the way physicians look at a patient they already know they cannot save. Voss studied it for a long while. Then he straightened and folded his 4 hands together, which is what he does when he is about to tell me something he would rather not. "Majesty," he said, "give me the mantle and I will give you back the mantle. Every thread, every dye lot, the exact weave, the precise flaw in the silver hem. I have scanned it to a resolution finer than the fibers themselves. By this evening I can grow you a copy no eye and no instrument in the Concord could tell from the original. Identical, perfect, down to the flaw." "It would not be the original," I said. "It would be better than the original," Voss said, and he meant it as comfort. "The original is failing, Majesty. Mine would not fail for 1,000 years. The law forbids a copy at the renewal. The law forbids a copy known to be a copy." He said this gently, delicately, and every artificer in the room kept their eyes on the floor. No one would know. No one could know. I could not tell it myself, and I would have made it. There it was, the whole soul of my empire offered to me across a light table with the kindest of intentions. When a thing breaks, unmake it. Grow a flawless new one. Let the flawless new one carry the name of the old, and let the loss be so seamless that no one ever feels it. That is grace. That is what we had spent 9 generations perfecting. And I nearly said yes. I want to be honest with you about that. I stood there with the covenant cloth of my whole reign fraying in front of me, and I nearly told Voss to take it and grow me a perfect lie, because the alternative was to stand before 1,000 houses in a ruin. My hand was already lifting to give the order. What stopped me was the silver hem. I looked down at that uneven line of silver, bright here, dull there, running crooked along the edge exactly the way it had run when I was a stubborn girl who dyed her own thread badly and refused to pull it out. Voss could copy the crookedness. He had scanned it. His copy would have the flaw exactly where mine had it. But it would be a flaw he had placed there on purpose, measured and reproduced, and I would know, every time the light caught it unevenly, I would know that it was not the flaw I had made. It would be a picture of my mistake instead of my mistake, and somehow that was worse to me than the tear along the hem. "No," I said, "mend it." The room did not understand the word. I saw it pass over them like a language none of them spoke. "Mend." Voss tilted his head. "Majesty." "Repair it," I said. "The original, fix what is broken and leave the rest. I do not want a copy. I want this cloth whole again." Voss was quiet for a moment. Then he did something I had rarely seen him do in a century of service. He admitted he could not. "Majesty, I do not know how," he said. "None of us do. Our art is to unmake and to grow. We make the whole thing new always because making the whole thing new is faster and finer than any repair could ever be. That is the entire premise of our craft. To mend is. It is a different art, an older one. We do not have the instruments for it because for 9 generations there has been no reason to. You are asking me to add thread to old thread by hand, to match a dye that has faded unevenly, to close a tear without unmaking the weave around it. I could sooner teach my machines to dream." He spread his 4 hands, helpless and honest. "I can give you a perfect copy tonight. I cannot give you a mended original in 8 days or 8 years. No one in the Concord can. The knowledge is gone." And that should have been the end of it. That is the moment, in the older days of my empire, when the law would have been quietly set aside, and Voss would have grown his perfect copy, and I would have worn a beautiful lie to the renewal and told myself it was grace. Except that a human woman was in the room, and she cleared her throat. I had not noticed her. There was no reason I should have. She was part of the wardrobe tower's service staff, one of the humans who kept the tower, the ones who carried and cleaned and folded, the ones my court moved past 100 times a day without ever quite seeing. Humans hold the low posts in the Concord. It is not cruelty. It is only that they came to us late and poor. A small hardy folk from a small hard world, and the good posts were long spoken for. They launder, they carry, they tend. They are in the plain architecture of my palace furniture that walks. This one was old. Old for a human, which is old indeed, perhaps 60 of her years, her hair gone the gray of cold ash, her hands knotted at the knuckles, her gray service smock worn pale at the elbows. She had been standing against the wall the whole time, waiting to carry the mantle wherever it was told to go, and she had listened to the loomright paramount of the entire Concord confess that the thing could not be done, and she had cleared her throat. Voss turned. My whole court turned. The old human went a little pale under all those eyes, but she did not step back. "Beg pardon, Majesty," she said. Her Concord speech was rough, accented, plainly a second tongue learned late. "I don't mean to speak out of turn, but it can be done. The tear's the easy part. The hem'll take longer, matching that silver where it's faded, but it can be done. I've mended worse." She swallowed. "I'd need a needle and some thread, and the light." The silence that followed was the silence of a court that does not know whether it has just been insulted. Voss recovered first, and to his credit he was not unkind. "You are a launderer," he said. "Yes, sir." "You are proposing to repair the covenant cloth of the Concord, the first mantle, with a needle." "Yes, sir," the old woman said. "That's how mending's done." I saw Voss decide gently that she was simple. I saw the pity move across his face. "Thank you," he said, in the voice one uses with children and the elderly. "Threnody, please see her back to her duties. Majesty, I will have the copy ready by—" "What is your name?" I asked the human. She looked at me directly then, which few of my servants ever did, not out of insolence but out of the plain habit of an old woman who had stopped being afraid of a great many things. "Ada Corliss, Majesty." "You have done this before, mending?" "All my life, Majesty. My mother taught me and hers taught her. Back home you don't throw a thing out because it's torn. You fix it. Coat lasts 3 generations if you know how to turn a cuff and darn a heel." A small, dry motion at the corner of her mouth that I would later learn was as close as Ada Corliss came to a smile. "I've mended sails and a wedding dress, and once a fishing net a whole village ate off of for 20 years after. This is finer work than any of it, but it's the same work. You put good thread beside broken thread, and you make them agree." "You make them agree." I have thought about that phrase for a long time since. Voss stepped forward, and now there was an edge under his gentleness. "Majesty, with respect, this is the first mantle. We cannot allow an untrained hand, a launderer's hand, to work a needle through the covenant cloth on nothing but her word. If she errs one wrong pull, one thread caught wrong, the damage cannot be undone. Our machines cannot repair what we do not know how to repair. She could destroy in an afternoon what I can at least copy tonight. I must forbid it. And here is the part I am least proud of." I let him. "You are right," I told Voss. And to the old woman I said, not unkindly but with the whole weight of the throne behind it, "Thank you, Ada Corliss. But this cloth is beyond price, and I will not risk it on an art my own masters have lost. Return to your duties." She looked at me a moment longer. There was no anger in it, only something that might have been disappointment, though not for herself. Then she inclined her head, "Majesty," and she gathered up the empty carrying case she had been holding all along, and Threnody walked her to the door, and she was gone, back down into the parts of my palace I never saw, and I turned back to the light table and told Voss to prepare the copy after all. That was the 9th morning before the renewal. I want you to sit with how ordinary it was, how easy, how reasonable, how kind even. The loomright paramount had spoken sense. The old human was a launderer with a needle and a story about a fishing net. Any sensible ruler makes the same choice. I made it without a second thought. The second thought came at midnight. I could not sleep. This is not unusual for me. I have had 200 years to grow tired of my own company at night, but this was a different sleeplessness. I kept seeing the silver hem. Voss's copy was already growing in the fabrication hall, thread by perfect thread, and by dawn it would be finished, identical, flawless, indistinguishable, and I would wear it to the renewal, and no one alive would ever know the difference. No one alive would ever know the difference. That was the thought that would not let me rest, because it was not true. One person would know. I would know. Every renewal for the rest of my reign, I would stand before the houses in a beautiful, perfect, machine-grown lie, and somewhere in the low levels of my own palace, an old human woman would be folding laundry, a woman who had offered to give me back the real thing and been sent away, and I would know that I had chosen the copy because it was safe, and that safety had cost me the one handmade thing in a life that had otherwise been entirely, flawlessly made for me. I rose. I did not summon Threnody. I did not summon anyone. I went down myself, alone, in a plain dark robe with no marks of office, down through the sleeping wardrobe tower and into the service levels beneath it, the narrow gray corridors, the smell of soap and warm cloth, the parts of my own house I had never in 2 centuries walked. I did not know where I was going. I followed the light. At the end of a low passage, a single work lamp still burned, and beneath it, at a folding table, the old human was sitting with a torn service smock across her knees, mending it. At midnight. For herself, or for no one, just mending, because a thing was torn and she knew how to make it whole, and that was reason enough. She looked up and saw the Empress of the Conquered standing in her doorway in a plain robe, and to her lasting credit she did not fall to the floor or cry out. She only set down her needle and stood and said, "Majesty." "Sit," I said, "please." She sat. I had nowhere to sit but the edge of a laundry bench, so I sat there, which I am fairly certain no ruler of the conquered had done in the history of my line. "Voss is growing the copy," I said. "It will be finished by morning. It will be perfect." "I heard, Majesty." "I came to ask you a question." I found it was difficult to say. "If I gave you the true mantle, the real one, the ruined one, could you truly make it whole, not copy it, mend it, this cloth and no other?" Ada Corliss looked at me for a while. Old human eyes, faded pale but very steady. "I can't promise you perfect, Majesty," she said. "That's the thing you have to understand about mending, and it's why your machine men don't like it. A mend shows. If you know where to look, you can always find it, the place where the new thread meets the old, where the darn crosses the tear. A copy hides everything. A mend hides nothing, it just holds. I can make your mantle whole and strong and fit to wear another 200 years, but I can't make it look like it was never broken. The break'll be in it. Healed but in it." She paused. "Some folk don't want that. They'd rather have the copy that never broke than the real thing that did and got mended. I understand it, I just never agreed with it. The real thing that broke and got mended. I thought of my own 200 years, every crack in me quietly unmade and grown over, every loss made seamless, until I was not sure there was anything left in me that I had actually lived through rather than had replaced. And I thought, I would like, just once, to carry something that shows where it broke and held anyway." "Do it," I said. "The real one tonight if you can. Voss will object. Leave Voss to me." She did not smile. I told you she was sparing with that. But something eased in her old face, the way a thing eases when it is finally allowed to do what it was made to do. "I'll need the mantle, Majesty," she said, "and better light, and you'll have to be patient. Mending can't be rushed. Rush a mend and it fails, and then you've the tear plus the bad mend, and you're worse off than when you started." She reached into a battered kit beside the table, needles ranked by size, a hank of gray thread, a spool of silver, a thimble worn smooth and bright from 60 years of the same thumb. "But if you can wait," she said, "I can mend it." I could wait. I found, to my own surprise, that there was nothing in the whole Concord I wanted more than to wait. I stopped the copy myself, that same night. I walked into the great fabrication hall where Voss's under-artificers were tending the growing garment in its bath of light. And I told them to halt the process and disperse the copy back to the vats. They looked at me as though I had asked them to put out the sun. Voss was sent for. Voss came, robe hastily gathered, and when he understood what I intended, he argued with me longer and harder than any subject had dared in 50 years, and I let him, because he was arguing out of love for the mantle and duty to the throne, and I would not punish a being for that. But when he had spent all his arguments, I said only, The old woman told me a mend shows. I have decided I would rather wear something that shows where it broke than something that was never real enough to break. Bring her the mantle, Voss, and then leave her be. He obeyed. He did not understand, not that night, but he obeyed. And that is how it came to pass that on the 8th night before the renewal, in a small mending alcove off the great loom hall of the Silver Unconquered, an old human launderer sat down beneath a good lamp with the covenant cloth of my empire across her knees, and threaded a needle, and began. I stayed. That surprised everyone, including me. An empress has 1,000 duties, and none of them is to sit in a service alcove watching a servant sew. But I had halted the machines of my own empire on this woman's word, and I found I could not then walk away and leave her to it as though it were nothing. And there was another reason, one I only half understood at the time. I had never in my life watched a thing be made slowly, and some deep-buried part of me, the girl at the loom in Havrain, before the throne, before the machines reached the far shore, wanted, achingly, to see it. So I sat in a plain robe on a hard bench, and I watched Ada Corliss mend. It was the most boring thing I had ever witnessed, and I could not look away from it. She began with the tier along the lower edge, the width of my hand, the weave unraveling into loose fringe. I had thought she would simply sew it shut, drag the two ragged edges together and stitch across the gap. She did not. She explained as she worked in her rough, late-learned Concord speech, because I asked her to. She said talking helped her keep her rhythm anyway. "You never just pull a hole closed, Majesty," she said. "Pull it closed and you've puckered the cloth all round it and pulled the weave out of true, and it'll tear again next to your stitching first time it's stressed. No, what you do is you rebuild the weave. See these loose threads at the edge? Those are still good. Those are the mantle's own thread, come loose but not broken. So first you catch every one of them and lay it back where it belongs, like combing out a tangle, one strand at a time, and you anchor it. Then where thread's actually missing, gone, worn to nothing, only then do you bring in new thread. And you don't just lay it across the top. You weave it in. Over, under, matching the mantle's own weave so the new grows into the old. Done right, the new thread does the work of the missing thread, and the cloth's whole again, and it's not two pieces held together, it's one piece, made to agree. I watched her do it. It took her the whole first night to close a tier the width of my hand, one strand at a time. Over, under, her old knotted fingers moving in a small, patient rhythm that never hurried and never stopped, the thimble catching the lamplight, the needle vanishing and reappearing through the indigo weave so slowly I could follow each pass. When my under-artificers grew a garment, it appeared out of light between one breath and the next, whole and flawless and instantaneous, and it was a miracle, and I had watched it 10,000 times without ever once feeling anything at all. This old woman closing one hand's width of tier across an entire night, one thread agreeing with the next, this I felt in my chest like something I had lost a long time ago and forgotten I owned. I asked her, near dawn, why she had spoken up in the wardrobe tower, when Voss had already said it could not be done, and every eye in the room had told her to be silent. She did not look up from her needle. "Because it could be done, Majesty," she said, "and it seemed a shame for you to lose the real thing when it didn't need losing. I don't like to see a thing thrown out that could be saved. Never have, it's not in me." A pause, over, under. "My mother used to say throwing out what's broke is the lazy person's kindness. Feels generous giving you a shiny new one. But it's the mend that's the real gift, because the mend says this one was worth keeping. Anybody can hand you a new thing. Takes love to make an old thing whole." She tied off a thread with a small deft twist. "She was hard on me, my mother, but she was right about that. Takes love to make an old thing whole. Understand, I rule an empire that had, with the best intentions in the world, abolished mending entirely and called the abolishing grace, and I had lived inside that grace for 2 centuries and never once suspected that we had thrown away something worth keeping. It took an old human woman with a needle to say it plainly, in the small hours, over a torn hem, not knowing she was saying anything at all. She worked 3 nights. The second night she rebuilt the shoulders, where 2 centuries of the mantle's own weight had worn the indigo soft and gray and thin, not torn, but going, the cloth grown fragile as a held breath. She darned it from beneath, a whole invisible lattice of supporting thread laid into the back of the weave, so the worn face had something to hold to. And when she was done, the shoulders were strong again, but the outer cloth looked untouched, and I understood that she had put her whole night's labor into a thing that, done well, no one would ever see. I said as much. She shrugged. "Best mends are the ones nobody sees, Majesty," she said. "You only notice a mend that failed. A good one just quietly holds up the rest of your life and never asks for thanks." She glanced at me then, with that dry, near smile. "Bit like a lot of good work. Nobody sees the launderer either, till the day there's no clean linen." That landed harder than she knew, or perhaps exactly as hard as she knew. I had walked past this woman and 100 like her every day for years and never seen a single one of them, and my palace had run flawlessly on their invisible labor the entire time, the way the mantle's worn face rode flawlessly on the invisible lattice she was laying into it now. I did not answer her. I did not have an answer that would not have shamed me. The third night she came to the silver hem. My flaw. The uneven line of silver that I had spun and dyed badly as a stubborn girl, brighter in some places than others, frayed now in a dozen places, whole runs of it lifted and broken. This, she told me, was the hard part, and not for the reason I expected. Closing a tear was patience. Darning a worn shoulder was skill, but matching a faded, uneven, 200-year-old silver thread, that was something closer to an art, because the silver had not faded evenly. It had dulled where the light and the years had touched it most and stayed bright where they had not, so that even a perfect new silver thread laid in beside it would shout its newness, too bright against the old dull, too even against the old uneven. "A machine matched the average," she said, holding a length of my old silver up to the lamp, turning it, reading it with her eyes the way Voss read it with his instruments, but differently I saw, not measuring it but understanding it. "Match the average and lay in one even thread the whole way, and it'd look wrong because your hem was never even to start with. You dyed this yourself, Majesty, didn't you, when you were young?" It was not really a question. Thought so. "There's love in this thread and there's a mistake in it, and they're the same thing, and I'll not sand either one out of it." She set to work. "No, what I do is I take my new silver and I age it wrong to match. Dull it here, leave it bright there. Follow your own crooked line, so where I mend, the new runs uneven exactly the way the old runs uneven, and your mistake carries on unbroken. The flaw'll be whole again. Same flaw, just mended. The flaw would be whole again. Same flaw, just mended." She did it by hand and by eye across the whole third night, dulling and brightening her silver thread to follow the crooked stubborn line I had made 200 years before I was ever a throne, so that when she finished, the flaw in the silver hem ran on exactly as it always had, bright here, dull there, crooked all the way, and you could not tell, unless you knew precisely where to look, where my young hands had stopped and her old hands had begun. And where you could tell, because she was right, a mend shows, if you know, the seam between us was not a wound. It was a place where 2 women who had never met, born on different worlds 2 centuries apart, had put good thread beside broken thread and made them agree. She finished near the 4th dawn. She held the mantle up under the lamp, turned it once, checked it the way you check a thing you have given 3 nights of your life to, and then she stood, her old knees cracking, her hands stiff, and she draped it across my shoulders herself, which no launderer had any business doing to an empress, and which I would not have permitted from anyone else in the Concord. It was whole, it was strong, it was the true cloth, my cloth, the one I had woven, the one that had crossed my shoulders at every renewal of my reign, ruined and then made whole again, and it showed where it had broken, and it held. "Their Majesty," Ada Corliss said. "Good for another 200 years, maybe more if whoever comes after you learns to mend a hem." She gathered her kit, the ranked needles, the gray thread, the silver, the thimble worn bright from 60 years of the same thumb. I'd best get to the morning linen. And she would have gone. She would simply have gone back to the low levels and the laundry and the being unseen, having given me back the realest thing I owned, if I had let her. I did not let her. The renewal came on the 9th day. The hall of 1,000 looms filled with every house of the conquered, the high piers in their fabricated finery, flawless and grown that morning, each garment perfect and new and never once mended in its brief life. Voss was there, near the front, grave and correct. And the ruler of the conquered came before them and renewed the covenant of the worlds, wearing the first mantle across her shoulders, the true cloth, the ruined and mended cloth, the indigo whole again, the silver hem running crooked and bright and dull exactly as a stubborn girl had made it and an old woman had kept it. When the covenant was renewed and the hall waited for me to descend, I did not descend. I said instead that there was a thing the conquered had forgotten and that I meant to give it back. I told them about the mantle. I told them the whole of it, that it had been dying, that the finest artificers in the conquered had told me truly that they could not repair it, that they had offered me a flawless copy and that I had nearly taken it. And I told them why I had not. I told them that in 9 generations of grace, we had abolished mending so completely that the covenant cloth of the entire empire had nearly been quietly replaced with a lie, and that the only person in all the conquered who could actually save it was a woman my court had never once seen, a human launderer who had learned at her mother's knee a thing my masters had forgotten existed. Then I sent for Ada Corliss, and she was brought up from the low levels in her worn gray smock, blinking in the great light of the hall of 1,000 looms with the whole conquered staring at her, an old human woman who had expected to spend that morning on the linen. I came down from the dais to meet her, which broke a good deal of protocol, and I said, so that the whole hall heard it, "This is Ada Corliss. She mended what my empire could only replace. Every artificer of the conquered told me it could not be done, and she did it with a needle in 3 nights of her life and asked for nothing." I turned the mantle so the light caught the crooked silver hem. "You cannot see where she mended it. That is not because a machine hid the seam. It is because she was that good. The break is in it still healed and in it, and it will outlast me." The hall was silent. Then Voss, grave, correct Voss, loomright paramount of the whole conquered, stepped from among the high piers, crossed to the old human woman and bowed to her. 4 hands folded. A full bow, the bow one master gives another. And when the loomright paramount bowed, the whole hall of 1,000 looms followed, house by house, the fabricated finery bending like a field in wind, every peer of the conquered on their feet for an old woman in a laundry smock. Ada Corliss went scarlet to the roots of her ash-gray hair and looked as though she wanted the floor to unmake her the way the machines unmade everything else. When it was quiet again, she said, in her rough, late-learned conquered speech, loud enough only for me, "Majesty, this is a great deal of fuss over a hem." "I know," I said, "bear it a moment longer." I offered her a title. I want that on the record because it is the part where she surprised me most. I offered to raise her a name, a house, an artificer's rank above Voss's own undermasters, rooms in the high tower, a life lifted forever out of the low gray levels. Any ruler of the conquered would call it the least she was owed. She refused it, gently but entirely. "That's kind, Majesty, and I mean no insult," she said. "But I don't want a house and I don't want a tower. I'm a mender. I'd be no good to you up high with a title. I'd be miserable inside a month, and you'd have taken a decent launderer and made a bad lord. Let me keep my work," the dry near smile. "But if you want to give me something, give me a room with good light and let me teach. There's young ones down in the service levels, human and conquered both, quick hands, nothing to do all day but carry. Let me teach them to mend. Then when this hem goes again in 100 years, and it will, there'll be somebody who knows how to save it. That's worth more than a title. A title dies with me. A trade doesn't." So that is what I gave her. Not a house. A room with good light and apprentices and leave to teach. And then I gave the conquered something larger, because she had shown me it was owed. I ended the abolition. Not the machines are a genuine grace, and I am not a fool. But I struck down the law that a broken thing must always be unmade and replaced, and I made mending a lawful art of the conquered again, taught and honored 9 generations after we had thrown it away. Ada Corliss's little room with the good light became the first mending school the Empire had known in 300 years, and there were more before she died, and there are more now. My peers keep their grandfathers' coats again, turned and darned and carried forward, showing where they broke and holding anyway. We had called replacement grace for so long. I have come to think the deeper grace is the other one, the one that looks at a broken thing and says this was worth keeping, and takes the harder, slower, humbler road of making it whole. Ada Corliss taught for 11 years. She was buried at her own firm instruction in the plain gray smock with her kit, the ranked needles, the gray thread, the silver, the thimble worn bright from 60 years and 11 more of the same patient thumb. I attended. An empress does not usually attend the funeral of a launderer. I attended. I still wear the first mantle at every renewal. It is whole and it is strong and it is the true cloth, ruined once and mended, and it will outlast me exactly as she said. And every century, when I take it up and settle its weight across my shoulders, I turn the hem to the light and find the one place where an old human woman's silver meets a stubborn girl's, where 2 women born on different worlds 2 centuries apart put good thread beside broken thread and made them agree. And I think that of all the flawless, seamless, instantly grown perfections my empire ever handed me, that small visible seam, that place where it broke and held, is the only thing I have ever owned that I would not trade for anything the machines could make. You can always find the mend if you know where to look. I have stopped being ashamed that mine shows. I have started to think it is the best thing about me.